Hey everybody, and how's it going? Welcome back to my channel, Reading in the Dark. Byron here. This is going to be my March retro wrap-up, which includes my book haul for March 2018 in addition to the actual reading wrap-up for the month of March. And there's a lot of stuff on my list for March, so let's just dive right in. In March, I hauled 15 books. 2 of them were audiobooks, 2 of them were physical books, and the other 11 were ebooks. Math. And of those 15 books, I read 8. In fact, I don't think I read 8 of just those 15, but I hauled 15 and I read 8 in March. The first book that I hauled in March was Haven, Kansas by Alethea Kontis. This is a young adult thriller. I then purchased a new translation of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, translated by Christine Donougher. And it is translated anew and therefore is actually entitled The Wretched instead of Les Miserables. I then purchased another new translation, this time of Crime and Punishment by Dostoyevsky, translation by Nikolas, Pasternak, Slater. I looked at and compared, there was 2 or 3 new translations, relatively new translations, and I decided from reading the same passage in the 3 of them that I was most interested in reading the Slater translation. So I purchased that, and I am excited to read that one. I used to own The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and I've read a few of the stories from that collection, but I recently hauled Sherlock Holmes, the complete collection, so that is something that I will slowly make my way through. I also purchased the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff VanderMeer, so that includes Annihilation, which was recently made into a film starring Natalie Portman, Authority, and Acceptance being book 3. And I read all 3 of them in March, so we'll get to that. I then purchased 2 audiobooks. The Genesis Wave Parts 1 and 2 is a Star Trek The Next Generation. The first 2 books of a trilogy. It's read by Tim Russ, who was a series regular on Star Trek Voyager. I then purchased one of my physical books after having kind of fished an old Disney movie out of a DVD bargain bin in a gas station where I went late at night to get some ice cream, because sometimes that's a thing that I do. I saw this old movie called That Darn Cat, which starred Haley Mills and Dean Jones, and also had this woman in it. When I started watching it, I was like, who is that actress? I recognize her, and her name is Elsa Lanchester. She has a very interesting story, and she was a character actress in Hollywood. She did like a million things, and her mother has a very interesting story. And so I picked up this book. I had to obviously order this one online. It was out of print, and actually right after I ordered this, which is the first edition of Elsa Lanchester herself, they actually re-released the book for the first time. So now this book is more easy to find. You can actually get it new, but it's not available in an ebook. And so I purchased this lovely used copy of Elsa Lanchester herself, and it has one of my favorite features in any hardcover book, which is these sort of uneven pages. So I love that. So I purchased this hardcover online, and I am actually reading it now. I then got a great deal on the ebook Kindle edition of Fire from Heaven by Mary Renault. Mary Renault wrote a lot of historical fiction, and she has a trilogy about Alexander the Great, which follows him from his childhood up until his glory days. And the first book of the trilogy is called Fire from Heaven. And I got that from Amazon for a very, very good, I think it was like $2 or something. And I am currently reading that book as well. I then purchased a ebook of Bleak House by Charles Dickens. I've read the first chapter a couple of times because I was curious about it, and every single time I went all the way through the first chapter. So actually I'm excited to read that book. I just haven't actually started it in earnest yet. I then purchased the Wise House Classics Kindle edition of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which I read and I will talk about in a moment. And then I purchased my second print book of the month of March, which is the novelization of The Abyss, based on the screenplay by the filmmaker James Cameron. This book came out before the film did, I believe, and fills in a lot of the backstory. So it's not just a novelization of the film, it includes more information. Scott Card obviously is the author of Ender's Game and was a very popular author. So it's really neat that he was commissioned by James Cameron to write this book. Haven't read this yet, but I am excited to. Then I purchased I went all over the list on the Kindle store trying to find a good ebook version of the complete works of Shakespeare. It's hard to find a Shakespeare collection in ebook form that is formatted well, and this one is the Oakeshott Complete Works of Shakespeare, and I'm going to show it to you on my Kindle now because if you have a Complete Works of Shakespeare on your Kindle, you may know that a lot of them are really a mess. All right, so this is the cover of the Oakeshott Complete Works of Shakespeare, and what I like about this version is that it does have a table of contents for every play that he wrote, organized by tragedies, histories, etc. But it also has a table of contents within each work for each scene and act, etc., in the plays themselves. It has a nice character list at the beginning, and it was the only complete works that I could find that had it formatted in such a way that it was easy to read because they had every character's line separated and their names were bolded, and the names are not abbreviated, they are written out in full. So you'd be surprised, but that's actually uncommon. The ebook versions that I saw all had the names of the characters abbreviated, and I don't know why, because there's plenty of room, especially in an ebook, to just write them out. So I picked this up, and this is not something that I'm just going to read straight through exactly, but I just wanted to have a good, reliable copy of the Complete Works of Shakespeare on the go. So in terms of the books that I actually read in the month of March, the first audiobook that I listened to I didn't mention because I mentioned it in my previous retro wrap-up was the third part of the William Shatner Odyssey trilogy entitled Avenger. I finished it on March 2nd, but it was part of that trilogy, so I mentioned it before. The primary plot in Avenger was actually not as interesting to me as the subplot involving Spock and his parents, but it was fine. Anyway, the next book that I listened to was the audiobook of Mosaic by Jerry Taylor, which was read by the actress Kate Mulgrew, who played Captain Janeway on Star Trek Voyager. This book is mentioned in my Every Book I Think I Ever Read and Some That I Didn't video. In its print version was the first version that I read. Mosaic tells the backstory of Captain Janeway, so it was neat to have it read by the actress who played her. I love Mosaic. I think it's a lovely backstory for Janeway. It has a nice backstory explaining her relationship with her father and some details that made their way onto the actual TV show, which is fun. I've listened to the audiobook several times. It's an easy listen. It's abridged and adapted, and I'm looking forward to actually rereading the full version of the novel soon. I originally owned Mosaic in hardcover. That, along with many other books of mine from back in the day, has disappeared, and so I recently reordered the hardcover, a used copy of the hardcover of both Mosaic and Pathways, and they should be getting here really soon. And I really enjoy it. As Trek books go, I would give it a good 4-star rating. So Haven, Kansas by Alethea Kontis. This is probably the first young adult novel that I've read since I have been an adult, and I very much enjoyed it. It was a fun adventure. It deals with some serious issues. The main protagonist, her best friend, has passed away at the beginning of the book, and she's dealing with that, grappling with that. And then she discovers a secret room behind the wall of her bedroom, which is like everyone's fantasy when they're a kid, so that was really neat to read about. And I absolutely loved her depiction of the younger brother, whose name is Connor, and the mischief that he gets up to, but also the tenderness between the main protagonist, who's a teenage girl in high school. The relationship between her and her younger brother, Connor, was very, very sweet, and it made me feel happy, and I like seeing siblings that get along and love each other in books. Of course, they were teasing each other, but it's a really lovely relationship, and Connor is really, really funny. It was a fun mystery. It was spooky and atmospheric, and it was a really fun read. I loved Haven, Kansas, and I give it 5 stars. So then we get to the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff VanderMeer. This includes Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. So, you guys, Annihilation is a 5-star book for me. It is creepy. It is weird. It is confusing. It's trippy. It's really well written. And it was a fast read for me, but it was also a hard read for me. What happens in Annihilation for me is that you have, I think I would call her an unreliable narrator. The there's an expedition going into this mysterious area that has been cordoned off by a mysterious force that has been growing. Basically, one day, sort of like a dome-shaped kind of force field type situation just shows up on its own and encases an area of the coastline in California. And nobody can get in except for through one very specific route. And they've been sending expeditions in for many, many years to ascertain what's going on in there. The Southern Reach, by the way, is the name of the organization that sends the expeditions in. And the area is called Area X. And the people who go on the expeditions either don't come back alive, don't come back at all, or they come back very, very changed, injured, mentally deranged, damaged, basically. And this first book follows in the first person. The protagonist is a woman who is a biologist, and they don't use their names in the expedition, and so you don't know their names in the book. And the biologist's husband was on the previous expedition and returned under mysterious circumstances, and you learn quite a bit about her history with her husband, the hours that sort of elapsed after he came back mysteriously from his expedition, and then you see in the present time for her experience on the expedition itself and her interactions with the other people on her team and the woman who is leading the expedition, who is the psychologist. It is a fascinating book. It made me feel delusional. I felt like I was on drugs when I was reading it. It challenged me a lot as a reader. I wasn't actually sure what was going on sometimes, but not because it was poorly written, but because the character wasn't sure what was going on either. I thought it was brilliantly written. It left me in just the perfect state of wonder and awe and confusion. And it reminded me of and it's a very strange thing to compare it to, but I remember there was a film called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas that had to do with somebody who was on all kinds of drugs, and because of the way it was filmed, you feel drunk and high when you're watching the movie. And when I was reading this book, I was under its spell, and it entranced me, and I wasn't always totally sure what was going on, but I think I knew everything that the protagonist or the narrator knew, and so I went with it. And it was a crazy experience, and I don't think I've read something that made me feel that way before. Actually, this book at one point got my heart beating really, really fast and actually scared me, which does not happen. So I really loved Annihilation, and I had a quote I wanted to read from it on my Goodreads. Solitude could press down on a person, seem to demand that action be taken. And I thought that was very astute. When you are sort of left only to your own thoughts, things become sometimes more urgent than they are. And it's a neatly encapsulated sentence that talks about what it's like to kind of lose your mind when you're isolated for too long. And the book is just great. So the second book, in Authority, Authority is written in the third person about a man whose name we also do not learn, who only refers to himself as Control with a capital C. And he has been tasked with taking over the operation of the Southern Reach for the previous director. And you learn about his history with his career and with his family and his mother, who was a spy his entire life and had lots of secrets. And you watch him try to figure out what was going on in the previous expedition and to sort of bring some order to the chaos that is the Southern Reach. He was here to solve a puzzle in some ways, but he felt as if it were beginning to solve him instead. Authority did not thrill me quite as much. I started to feel as though Jeff VanderMeer was more interested in how to tell the story than in the story itself. The story was told in pieces, and I started to feel a little bit manipulated in terms of the order that things were happening in, just for the sake of keeping it slightly confusing. Whereas in the first book, the obfuscation of what was going on was completely valid because we were seeing it through the perspective of someone who was trying to decipher it in real time. I liked a lot of the backstory that we got in the second book, Authority, about the characters, and I enjoyed Control, but I wish something needed to have been done differently for me to accept the sort of bass-backwards way that the story was being told, because it felt like it was being told in a confusing manner simply to be confusing. Now, the third book in the trilogy is called Acceptance. Funny that they're all A's. So Acceptance is told in multiple different POVs. It's the only book in the trilogy that does not stick to one narrator. It hops from chapter to chapter. And it was appropriate because it brought together all the different various stories and perspectives in order to give you a view of the full scope of everything that was happening during the expeditions and everything that was happening in Area X. And all of the disparate pieces of the puzzle kind of came together. Portions of this book are written in the second person. In other words, like, you know it's going to rain, so you grab your raincoat while you're rushing out the door, that kind of thing. Second person. And I don't think that I'd ever read anything in the second person before, and I think that might be how the book started, and I went, oh gosh. But it went all over the place from narrator to narrator, and they weren't all told in the second person. I think only the one was. And it's a confrontational way to write a narrative, I think. And I always think that although in the second book I think Jeff VanderMeer was maybe trying too hard, I do think that he's really brilliant at the technique and the method and the artifice of how he's telling his story, not just the story itself and not just having well-drawn characters, but the way he unravels the story threads is very, very clever. And that's what I think maybe sets him apart as a writer, and what I really enjoyed about this trilogy, aside from the obvious fun of the sci-fi horror factor. It was a satisfying finale, and I have a quote from this one as well. "The only solution to the environment is neglect, which requires our collapse." And that's sort of foreboding and relevant to the story, and it reminds me a little bit of Michael Crichton, but it's a theme that I think is very interesting and relevant to the books, and it's another example of, I think, his concise use of language. I really enjoyed this trilogy, and I look forward to reading them again, and I would recommend them to absolutely anybody who is even remotely interested in scary stories, fantastic stories, science fiction stories. Wonderful. 5 stars for the first book. I think I gave 3.5 stars to the second book and 4 stars to the third book. And overall, I would call this a 4.5 star trilogy. Really, really wonderful. The last book that I read in March was The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Now, this is a very classic, very famous novella by Henry James. It is atmospheric and creepy and spooky, and it concerns a young woman, very young woman, who is sort of unworldly and inexperienced and is hired as a governess for a wealthy man with 2 children who is away on work, I believe. He's away, and he wants a governess for his children, and he has no intention of being home at any point, and he does not want to be bothered. He does not want the governess to write to him or telegram him or make any attempt to get his blessings on anything or ask his opinion on anything. He's just like, you take care of the kids and just leave me out of it, because he has better things to do, you guys. So, The Turn of the Screw, Henry James. I had not suspected in advance that her comfortable face would pull me up, and I somehow measured the importance of what I had seen by my thus finding myself hesitate to mention it. Scarce anything in the whole history seems to me so odd as this fact that my real beginning of fear was one, as I may say, with the instinct of sparing my companion. On the spot, accordingly, in the pleasant hole and with her eyes on me, I, for a reason that I couldn't then have phrased, achieved an inward resolution, offered a vague pretext for my lateness, and, with the plea of the beauty of the night and of the heavy dew and wet feet, went as soon as possible to my room. It makes more sense to me now, rereading it and reading it aloud, but that is what I had to do with this book. It must be read aloud. Here's the deal. So, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. A lot of people complain about his writing style. It's extremely verbose, and his sentences are like labyrinths that you can get lost in. And if you're even remotely tired, you will have to read some of these sentences over and over and over again, and you may still not understand what you read. So what I have learned about Henry James is that, first of all, he was very prolific, and he wrote hundreds of stories and like dozens of novels. And as he got older, later on in his career, his writing became more convoluted like this, and it is attributed by many sort of literary historians to the fact that as he got older, he started dictating his fiction and having someone else write it down for him. And so that may explain why some of his later works have such long, convoluted sentences. Now, this sentence has a ton of commas in it, and it sort of reminded me a little bit of, and this along with one other one, I'm trying to figure out which one, reminded me a little bit of the chapter in Flowers for Algernon, where he discovers commas and he uses them as often as he can. However, I think they're all in the right places, but these sentences, you guys, are crazy. So basically, the governess is young and inexperienced. She's totally alone with the children. She has nobody guiding her. The boy has been sent home from his boarding school for a reason that no one will tell her, and they don't want to speak of it. And so she's wondering what in the world he could possibly have done to be expelled from his school because he seems like such an angel. She becomes sort of unnaturally enamored of the children. She describes them as being angelic. She describes them in terms of like glowing with like a veil of light, a shroud of light around them. And she becomes so fixated on how beautiful they are as young children, the boy and the girl. But as my little conductress, with her hair of gold and her frock of blue, danced before me round corners and pattered down passages, I had the view of a castle of romance inhabited by a rosy sprite, such a place as would somehow, for diversion of the young idea, take all color out of storybooks and fairy tales. I was a little late on the scene, and I felt, as he stood wistfully looking out for me before the door of the inn at which the coach had put him down, that I had seen him, on the instant, without and within, in the great glow of freshness, the same positive fragrance of purity in which I had, from the first moment, seen his little sister. So again, commas. Also, these children are angels. She just goes on and on about how wonderful these kids are, and it's interesting because the more and more she does it, the more uncomfortable I became, and the more I felt like, okay, so they're great. She was becoming a little creeptastic, and I think that was the point. And that was the first moment when I started to wonder if maybe there was a problem with this woman. So The Turn of the Screw was hard to read, but it was really great, and it stuck with me. I enjoy any kind of a haunted house story, any kind of a ghost story. I certainly enjoy any kind of a scary story that involves an unreliable narrator or someone that you have to wonder, did they really see what they think they saw? And it's left very ambiguous. And for some people's taste, myself included, I think the ending maybe is even a little too ambiguous, but I also think that's where the story's power lies. But it forces your mind into uncomfortable places. The whole point of this story, I think, is for you to wonder exactly what was going on. Reading a story about somebody who's losing their grip on reality from their perspective is interesting, because especially in a story that's written in such a convoluted style as Henry James wrote The Turn of the Screw, because it makes you question what they're telling you, but it also makes you question what you've read, and it makes you want to go back and reread. And the writing style does that too. So you spend the entire time that I read the story, I was wondering, A, what's really going on? B, did I actually just misread something? And so you're questioning every aspect of the reality of the story that you're reading. I thought it was very effective. It is a difficult read for being so short, but I really enjoyed it. The ending was a little abrupt, and it was a little ambiguous. But again, I think that maybe is part of the story's charm. I do remember reading it fondly, and I would definitely will be rereading it. I guess I would give it, it's just hard to quantify. The Turn of the Screw is a very interesting experience. 3.5 stars. So those were my reads for the month of March. Little update on me right now. I'm still currently reading Fire from Heaven by Mary Renault. And I am also still reading Elsa Lanchester herself. I hope to finish that this month. I am slowly making my way through the collected short stories and novellas and tales by Henry James. Always a good time with Henry James. I'm still early on in the collection, so I haven't reached his later, more convoluted period where The Turn of the Screw comes from. I read Turn of the Screw as a separate ebook, although it is also included in this collection. About a month ago, I read Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh, and I really enjoyed that book. And she has a new novel out entitled My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and actually came out today. I pre-ordered it, and I had it as of midnight last night, and started reading it a little bit last night, read some of it during my downtime at work today, read a lot more. I think I'm already 30% of the way through, and I'm probably just going to keep on reading that book tonight. I might even finish it tonight or tomorrow. Ottessa Moshfegh is a very unique voice, and I really enjoy reading her. I dig her. I think she's a little kooky and crazy, but she writes super, super real people to me. Some people describe her character Eileen as being weird, and I don't think she's weird at all. I think she's actually strangely normal, and that's what people are reacting to. Oh, I'm actually reading this book, Prime Directive. I picked this up the other night because I was so kind of overwhelmed by my historical fiction experience with Mary Renault that I decided I needed something a little bit more fun. And this is possibly the best written Star Trek book I have ever read. Yeah, I'm really impressed. I just really am enjoying this one. So those are the books that I'm reading. Elsa Lanchester herself, Fire from Heaven by Mary Renault, Prime Directive by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens, Novellas and Tales by Henry James, and My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. So I will finish the My Year of Rest and Relaxation very, very soon, and then I think I will finish this very, very quickly, and then I will finish Fire from Heaven, and then I will finish Elsa, and then I will finally I will move on, but I will continue to have Henry James going on the side because that's a fire that's going to take a while to burn, you guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, please do feel free to hit the thumbs up button down below and subscribe to my channel if you feel so inclined. I appreciate you taking the time to watch my video. And until next time, remember to read more books, drink more coffee, but don't forget to sleep. Thanks, guys.